Hello there and welcome to a review of Undaunted 2020 Callisto. Kindly provided to us by Osprey Games and designed by David Thompson and Trevor Benjamin. This plays either 2 players head-to-head or 4 players 2v2, or just one person having a nice time on their lonesome, fighting against the rules in a book. Now, this is very much a game still using the excellent Undaunted system, which shot to fame after a hot collaboration with World War II, but has now gone to space. I can only assume that this game was designed in zero gravity, because it's one of the most unexpectedly heavy board games I've ever laid eyes on. This is chocked full of more cardboard than honestly feels sensible. In the interest of time and sanity for this review, I am going to be talking about this as if you have some sort of basic understanding of the Undaunted games. If you don't worry, I'm going to do a turbo quick primer. If that's not enough though, I would recommend going back and watching one of our earlier reviews. Undaunted then, in a speedy little nutshell. 2 players fight each other across a map, each cycling through a small deck of cards that specifically activate matching units on the board. You've got a shop of cards that you can bolster up your deck with, letting you activate certain units more frequently, or maybe bringing in a whole new type of troop into the fight. And these games are pretty frequently about taking and holding positions on a map and shooting at the other player's units while you're doing that. Hitting an enemy unit removes a matching card from their deck, and when you can't find any more cards to remove, ha! They dead! And one magic tiny rule that makes this system pop is if at any point you shoot a troop and they have one of those cards currently in their hand, then you ping it straight out of their hand, and now it means that on their go, they only get to do 2 things instead of 3, which is honestly quite bad. Board games are excellent. I don't know if you got the memo about that. The other tiny magical rule that makes these games amazing is the fact that you only draw 4 cards each round and you have to choose one of them to lose as initiative. A higher number card makes it more likely you're going to go first, but it also means you then can't use that card on your turn. So maybe you just play a low numbered card and accept that you're going to go second, but you can use that good card. But then if they shoot that character, then you lose that. It's a spicy little system, and these games are amazing. And that's why we're giving this a really thorough look. And this one, as I've mentioned, has got space in it instead of fields, and trade unionists instead of Nazis. Call Grandad and tell him the Great War was just fine, actually, because now we've got robots. I would have been happy enough just with a sci-fi reskin, but that's because I'm a science fiction idiot, and that's fine. But this is something actually quite different. There's a unique take on Undaunted here. There's something that might be a little bit special. To try and explain why, I'm going to start by telling you about the factions. We've got these miners. They've struck a better deal for themselves by cutting out the middleman that was basically shafting them. And then the other faction are a private security firm who've been hired to stop them from doing that. Maybe both sides are bad. It reminds me quite a lot of one of my favourite TV shows, The Expanse. Amos is the best big boy, no big boy is a better big boy. And the writing here is deft and subtle. An outline of the conflict in a matter-of-fact way, almost as if you're reading a news report about current events. This is super cool sci-fi stuff that's given quite a light touch, and a big shout out here to the writer Robbie McNiven. Because this corporation initially hopes to solve this business dispute fairly peacefully, the first mission only sees you sending in some corporate security forces, a few scouts, and obviously just for safety purposes, a couple of partially lethal mechanized suits. But unfortunately, things don't get resolved peacefully, and the violence escalates across a 8-mission campaign that is tense, immersive, and honestly very exciting. I do have very mixed feelings about these 4 full playing boards that ship with the game, each being used for just 1 unique mission, but these missions are cool. Rather than just being about taking and holding territory, a lot of these missions feel really dynamic, requiring that you keep thinking about what you're doing and sometimes quite rapidly pivot. There's no denying that these pre-made maps give the game more character, occasionally giving off almost delicious Space Hulk vibes, a throwback to a time when you could just see the shape of a map and get excited. This one has a battle in 2 places at once. One bit's on a spaceship and the other's on a planet. Now that's just tapping right into prime inner child Matthew. But the reason that these maps shine is because of how they interact with the factions. So there are some duplicates here in terms of same unit, different squad, but look at how many different types of industrial workers you have here, each of them using the equipment they have to fight back. There's a patchwork texture to it that really gives a sense of insurgency, a really human push. It's really cool, and I love the detail that alongside the names for each of these different fighters, you have nicknames, whereas on the corporate security cards, you have serial numbers. Kiss a chef. And while the workers just gain better access to more and more allies from within their own ranks, the corporate security simply ramps things up, shifting from crowd control into deadly snipers and missile barraging mechs. And it's the specific rules on these cards combined with the art that really bring the game to life. This guy with a circular saw. Not too much of a problem when they're way over there, but if they get right up in your grill, then suddenly, oh no, my robot legs. Don't cut off my robot legs, I need those. And I love that the theme of this game, which is basically people doing the work versus the people who are taking the profit from the work, actually feels like it's embedded within the mechanics of the game in terms of how it thinks about work and in terms of how it treats tools. The miners use tools in a way that just makes their job easier. When moving around the map in their vehicles, they can take up to 3 human units with them, allowing for turns in which with just 3 cards, this faction can pull off quite startling maneuvers. Whereas the corporate security money faction, they have tools that are much more dangerous and in abundance. But their tools feel more speculative. The mech suits can come and do incredible, dangerous, powerful things. But they need looking after. They don't just make your job easier. Moving them around the map with the protection of ground troops is a process that can often take multiple turns. So while you're slowly plodding forward trying to establish a front line, the people in the drill are doing donuts, moving their whole army just somewhere else. And so do I really have to babysit this robot? Can I not just leave the robot on its own and not send any troops? Well, you could, but if that lady with a power tool gets anywhere near, it's just going to be very expensive junk. The mech units are vulnerable as heck, and they're interesting in that their deck isn't just a selection of cards that you can bolster up with uniform copies. You have gunners and navigators, meaning you specifically choose what you mostly want that unit to do, but also it means that if you take damage and start losing crew members, you can very rapidly end up with a unit that either can't attack at all or can't move, neither of which it's bad. But the final spicy sprinkle on this little rules pancake is that the initiative numbers on all of the cards for the mechs are all really low numbers, which means if you do just invest heavily and put loads of robots in your deck, then great, could be amazing, but it means you're more than likely to be coming second each round, and a lot can happen when a player goes first. And it's really thematically nice that these metal things are quite sluggish, and it means that generally speaking, the two factions are quite different in the fact that the security forces are lumbering, slow, trying to keep things together, whereas the dynamism of the miners and their ability to just rapidly change the board state is an absolute headache. It's a dynamic that makes both players feel very dangerous, but also constantly a little bit worried. Proper bum squeezing, clenching for both players at all times. Presumably you're going to be squeezing and clenching your own bum, but honestly, it's your house. You make the rules, Susan. And this shift away from more modular, tile-based maps in traditional Undaunted allows for way more terrain-based rules than you could sensibly fit onto a map just using tokens. You've got areas that are too fragile to accommodate vehicles, corridors that mechs can't get into or shoot into, leaving you just waiting outside of a hole with a chain gun like some sort of cyberpunk remake of Tom and Jerry. And then we've got the real shiny new feature of Undaunted, Callisto, the concept of some things being higher up than others. That's right, we've got 3 different dice now, and the D10 has got a 10 in it. They said it couldn't be done. If you're attacking up towards high ground, you roll a bad D8 dice. Traditional flat mode, it's a normal D10. And then if you can find yourself in a position where you're shooting down on people as you should be, my lord, You get to roll a 12-sided dice. Nice, that's just nice. Never gonna find that. And in a lot of ways, Callisto doesn't really feel like a war game. There's not a lot of holding positions and taking pot shots at each other. There's a lot of emphasis here on close quarters skirmishing and tactical maneuvers. The majority of really good, effective attacks in this game that you can pull off have a range of 0, which means you need to be in the same space. And that means that often taking shots, you just get to roll 1 dice, which is not great. And that makes high ground so important and really means that you are using the maps and trying to take advantages where you can. Because if you're rolling just 1 dice to hit someone and you need to roll a 7, rolling a 7 on an 8-sided dice feels a lot nastier than rolling a 7 on one with 12. And good gosh, good gravy. These dice are all really lovely colors. It's subtle, but it's not black, it's kind of a dark blue. Honestly, the entire of this game looks absolutely gorgeous. It's just lush. It's bright and colorful whilst also kind of grimy, and the graphic design has that cool sci-fi movie vibe, you know, where people are using computers that are just like walls of blue text and little arcane symbols you don't understand. And you've got all these little like monochrome things on the board that mean like, I don't know what this one is, but is this one binoculars? Yeah, it's binoculars. Those are space binoculars because of all the angles. And that one, I'll have to look that up in the manual. And you know what? The manual looks nice, but it is not a good manual. You've got a board and cards that are heavy on icons, and the manual just isn't easy to pass as a reference when you're playing. And even when I scoured the whole thing and reread it multiple times, there were still some rules that just felt a bit unclear. As much as I begrudgingly do love these 4 double-sided specific campaign maps, even though it's kind of ridiculous, I can't help but feel that the only reason they actually exist is because without these, setting up this game would just be a nightmare. So firstly, it doesn't help that this box travels about as well as a jellyfish through a slingshot. You've got these lovingly shaped plastic beds for our robots and our vehicles, but gosh, you've got so many similar looking tokens that are just left loose and jumbling around. I can see what they were going for when they had one of the factions having squadrons A, B, C, and D, and the other ones having Y and Z. But then their mech squadrons also have squad letters, so you do have an A and a C, but then you also have a squad V, which looks so much like the Y that, come on. And in the same way that sci-fi interfaces look super cool, but if you actually had to sit and work at one all day, every day, as your main computer, you'd quit? The aesthetic choices in this game are really cool, but they do impact its usability. The miners look and feel like a real faction, but all of these people wearing yellow with yellow cards, that's a lot of yellow. And it means that when you're trying to find a hewer or a scanner or a blaster, that's a lot of yellow. I mean, I've already known this to be the case, but this was a game that really helped me internalize the fact that being colorblind must be really, really annoying. The simplicity and the clarity of the art in the previous Undaunted games made it really quick to spot a mortar team or a sniper, and that was because you had a lot of blank space and silhouettes to work with on the cards. But here we've got a game that looks gorgeous, but is much harder to pass. And it's a huge shame because the artistic skills on show here are evidently fantastic, and the changes that would have had to be made here to make it work better would have been small. Once you're actually all set up and playing, it's fine. Obviously it's not ideal that every time your dad needs to find Ripper B, it takes 10 seconds, but it's fine. But setting up the game is just an absolute headache. Now this is the same way that the instructions for which cards you need in each scenario was formatted in the original Undaunted. But in this game, it just isn't fit for purpose, because the 4-player variant splits off the factions into 2 separate teams. And then you have to work out which of the things on this list isn't available in the shop for this mission, and it's usually just 1 or 2 things. I'd say honestly, for most of the missions, it would have been easier if they just told me which things to put back in the box, rather than starting each scenario with a cross-referencing session that makes me feel like I'm basically auditing a slightly jazzy tax return. Callisto does so much cool, new, stuff. It feels like a genuinely interesting twist on Undaunted. It is considered and fascinating and genuinely plays really differently to the original game. But in this process of stretching the system of Undaunted, of twisting it into something new, you can really see the cracks starting to appear. It's a bit like the way that Fog of War is now interference. It kind of makes sense, but in losing some of that simple, mutually shared language, some of the core bits of the game which you really need to keep in your head and remember, because otherwise the game goes sideways real fast, are just a little bit tougher to keep there than they were before. It's so frustrating. This is obviously a game that has built on the foundation of Undaunted in a way that's really interesting and cool, but it's expanded to the point where the foundations no longer are able to support it. And it feels like they haven't noticed that, and now it's wobbly at the bottom when the bottom could have been reformed. I've got to stop talking about bottoms, but you get what I mean. It could have had a better bottom. Right, that's enough. That's enough. And the result of all of this is we've got a game that I really hoped might be an excellent entry point for people into the series. For people who wanted to try Undaunted, but really just needed a different theme. It's not that. I kind of feel like if you love Undaunted, this is cool, but you have to have some prior knowledge or at least a bit of passion in order to wade through some of the mud that stops you from getting into the door and into this game, which means because of that, I can't in good consciousness give this the Shut Up and Sit Down recommends badge, which is a shame because, honestly, I love it. I hate setting this game up. I hate setting up this game. Once you get going, once you're into it, once you're in the rhythm, once you know the rules, not just no, you know, when you can like, man, you can go away now. I know this one. This game is electric. That classic Undaunted cycle of draw 4 cards, choose one for initiative, I play 3, you play 3, and then bang, we're back in again for a brand new round. In this setting, in this format, it absolutely pops. And before you know it, once you're on the road, once you're going, you can feel the wind in your hair of the space wind. And honestly, at that point, all of that setup, all of that horrible muddy business behind you feels like it's 1,000 miles away. It's ancient history. We're flying now, we're cooking. The same design choices that make this game difficult to pass do bring the world to life. And the scenarios and maps are interesting and juicy. And it's a problematic pivot point, but honestly, again, these ridiculous boards that I kind of hate and kind of love, it is kind of great that once you've set up all of the fluffy stuff, you can just flip it over. Am I going to do this now? Oh, I don't want to do this. I'm doing it. You could just flip it over. And now we're playing a new game. Oh, I wish I hadn't done that. If you're one of the few people with the gigantic luxury of being able to just leave a board game set up while you play a whole campaign, then almost all of these problems and irritations melt away pretty rapidly. But for most of us, that's not an option. Once you're in the air with this game and soaring, it is smooth and beautiful and I love it. But it's just so much harder than it should be to get it off the ground each time. And for some people that won't be a problem, but for most people, it will. It's annoying. I love it. It's so frustrating. It's brilliant. It's cool. I hope that you've found some entertainment or informational value in this review of arguably a love letter to a game. Sure, it was a love letter that had a long section in the middle about everything that I thought it was doing wrong and why I was angry, which is arguably in a love letter is a bit of a red flag, but it was still a love letter to this game. If you're looking for something deeply thematic and sci-fi with fiddly rules and too much plastic, then I still really like Nemesis. It does a great job of just being aliens. And I spent a really long time trying to think what could I recommend as a really tight head-to-head card game, combat game that's a little bit easier to learn and play. It's just Undaunted. Just check out Undaunted. It's a great game. Finally, if you've enjoyed this video in any capacity or you just have broad sympathy for men who can't stop saying the word bums, then you might consider donating to Shut Up and Sit Down. We are almost entirely funded by those who like it. We don't make videos based on sponsors, we just make video reviews of what we want to do and what we want to cover because we think it's interesting or cool. And if you want to support that kind of work and support this kind of stuff, then if you can, do it. Thank you very much for watching and we'll see you next time.